History is often shaped by a handful of pivotal moments, and few are as significant as the Chinese Civil War. The outcome of that conflict transformed not only China, but also the balance of power across the world. But what if history had taken a different turn? What if the Chinese Communist Party had lost? To understand this alternate future, we first need to look at what actually happened. The Chinese Civil War was fought primarily between the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, and the nationalist government, known as the Kuomintang, or KMT for short, led by Chiang Kai-shek. Although fighting began in the late 1920s, the conflict paused during the Second World War while both sides united against the Japanese invasion. Once Japan surrendered in 1945, the Civil War resumed. By 1949, the Communists had secured victory. Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China, while the defeated nationalists retreated to the island of Taiwan, where they continued to govern under the Republic of China. The communist victory fundamentally reshaped China's future. Mao introduced sweeping land reforms, nationalized industry, and established a one-party communist state. However, his rule also brought immense human suffering. The Great Leap Forward, an attempt to rapidly industrialize the country, resulted in one of the deadliest famines in human history. Later, the Cultural Revolution disrupted education, it destroyed cultural heritage, and it led to widespread political persecution. It wasn't until Deng Xiaoping introduced market-oriented reforms in 1978 that China's economy began the remarkable growth that transformed it into the world's second largest economy. But imagine that 1949 ended differently. Suppose the nationalists managed to defeat the communists and retain control of mainland China. Rather than fleeing to Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek would have remained the leader of a united Republic of China. Initially, life probably would not have looked dramatically different for ordinary people. The KMT itself was far from democratic. Corruption, political repression, and martial law would likely have continued for many years. Opposition parties would almost certainly have been restricted, and the government would have prioritized stability over political freedom. However, unlike Mao's government, the nationalists would have had little reason to pursue radical communist policies. Private businesses would have continued to exist. Foreign investment would have been welcomed, and agriculture would have remained largely in private hands. As a result, China would likely have avoided catastrophes such as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, preventing millions of deaths and preserving much of the country's intellectual and cultural heritage. Economically, China's development may have started much earlier. Instead of waiting until the late 1970s to embrace market reforms, the government might have gradually expanded industry and trade throughout the 1950s and 60s. Close economic ties with the US, Japan, and Western Europe could have accelerated investment, technology transfer, and manufacturing. This path would have looked similar to the rapid economic development seen in South Korea and Taiwan. Strong government planning would still play an important role, but within a broadly capitalist economy rather than a centrally planned communist system, China would likely become an export powerhouse decades earlier than it did in our own timeline. Politically, the country might have followed a similar trajectory to Taiwan itself. The KMT ruled Taiwan under martial law for nearly 40 years before gradually introducing democratic reforms during the late 20th century. A mainland China under nationalist rule may have experienced a similar transition, with authoritarian rule slowly giving way to competitive elections, an independent judiciary, and greater freedom of speech as the country became wealthier and more educated. China's role on the global stage would also be very different. Without a communist government, relations with the Soviet Union would have been far weaker, while ties with the West would likely have remained strong throughout the Cold War. Events such as the Korean War and the Vietnam War may also have unfolded differently without Communist China playing such a significant regional role. By the time we reach 2026, this alternate China would likely be recognizable as one of the world's leading powers, but with one very different identity. It would almost certainly possess one of the world's largest economies, supported by decades of international trade, advanced manufacturing, and technological innovation. Politically, it may resemble a larger version of modern Taiwan or South Korea, a country that spent decades under authoritarian rule before evolving into a stable democracy. Citizens would enjoy greater political freedoms, independent media, and regular elections while maintaining a strong sense of national identity. Socially, many of the scars left by Mao's political campaigns may never have existed. Historic temples, works of art, and cultural traditions destroyed during the Cultural Revolution would have been preserved. Universities and scientific institutions would have experienced uninterrupted development, potentially making China an even earlier leader in research and technology. Of course, no alternate history is certain. The nationalists faced serious problems with corruption and governance, and success was far from guaranteed. But if they had managed to overcome those challenges, China today might be not only one of the richest countries in the world, but also one that combined economic strength with democratic institutions, creating a nation that was every bit as influential as today's China, but built on a very different political foundation.